I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, Kent Fiala, and I'd like to share a few things I know about Kent, although I'm well aware that many of you know him far better than I do. He's definitely had a big impact on the local birding community, in part through his long-term support and leadership of the Chapel Hill Bird Club and also other local birding groups. He's also been a dedicated supporter of eBird, which is the topic of his talk tonight. His impact on eBird has been on both sides, so to speak, as a contributor and a reviewer. As an example, on the contributor side, I wanted to show you a few things because he may not toot his own horn later. On the contributor side, I looked him up just a half hour ago. He's number 8 in North Carolina for posting the most total species, 394. There's someone below there called You, who I don't know who she is, but she doesn't look great. He also posts wonderful photographs and also sonograms of birds, which I especially like. On the flip side of the contribution, he is also serving as a reviewer for the Piedmont region, or the reviewer for the Piedmont region, which is an important job, and I hope he's going to tell us more about that tonight. Just a few biographical notes. Kent started birding at a young age, growing up in Nebraska. And this was my final slide, which many of you have seen, but if you're not on Facebook, maybe you haven't seen this book, but it's just such a wonderful photograph from 1963. It's priceless. If anyone has trouble figuring out which one Kent is, I'm going to let him give you clues during his presentation. Anyway, after chasing sparrows as a young boy, his interest in birding and nature continued, and he went on to receive a PhD at the University of Michigan with a dissertation topic on red-winged blackbird breeding. In more recent years, he was a software developer at SAS, and he worked there until his retirement. And these days, if you're lucky, you might spot him on a local trail sporting his new Bose earphones. Now I'll turn the screen over to Kent.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be here tonight. I've talked to this club a couple of years ago about eBird, and I also talked to New Hope Audubon about eBird last December. By the way, these are my Bose earphones. I'm using them as my microphone tonight. So in those two previous talks, I talked about eBird fairly broadly, just generally what it is, what you can get out of it, entering data into it. Tonight, I'm going to take quite a different approach and really get into some basic nuts and bolts about entering data into eBird. So my target audience is people who already have experience entering data into eBird. And I'm going to talk about entering data into eBird. So what can I tell you that you don't already know? I'm going to focus on things that I think might be a little mysterious, things that I get questions about, and mistakes that I see people make. A little bit about the format. I did invite people to bring questions. I'll do ask me anything about eBird at the end. Actually, at the time I invited questions, I thought the talk was going to be a little shorter, and then when I finally got my act together, put it together, it has turned out to be a pretty long talk. It's going to be about an hour. So I'll be tired when I'm done, but there's no captive audience here. You can leave the meeting whenever you like, and as long as people stick around asking me questions, I'll try to answer them. So at the heart of, let's see, I haven't shared my screen yet, have I? Um, there we go. You see that? Could somebody unmute and affirm that they see that?
Yep.
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So at the heart of eBird data entry is the checklist. And when you set up a checklist to use in eBird, there's actually a little bit of magic there. When you start a checklist, you get a list of birds, and it's not just any old list of birds. It's not a list of all the birds in the world. It's not a list of birds in Australia. It's not a list of birds in Costa Rica. It's not a list of birds that you'll see 6 months from now. It's a list of birds that you might plausibly see here today. So how does that magic happen? Well, what's on the checklist is driven by a control file that we call the filter. And filters are a little bit mysterious because for whatever reason, the folks at eBird Central have decided not to make those accessible to the public. So the general users cannot actually see the filters. But there's some things that you can know about filters. They are geographic. A filter applies to a certain geopolitical, geographic area. Here in North Carolina, we have the state divided up into 13 filter regions. Some states divide things up more finely. They have the filters at the county level. But here in the Carolinas, it's worked out fairly well for us to have larger filter areas. So you can find out where the filter areas are in North Carolina by going to the Carolina Bird Club website. And up at the top, there's this button that says Sightings. I hope everybody's used that button. You go to that page and you get a list of notable birds that have been reported to eBird in the last 7 days. You probably always just skip over the interesting text that's up at the top of that page, but I want to draw your attention to this one line here that says, the list of eBird reviewers for the Carolinas is here. So you click on that page and it tells you who the people are who are eBird reviewers for North Carolina and down below for South Carolina. Actually, our official title is eBird Regional Editor, but we usually just say reviewers for short. And here's a map that shows the 13 regions in North Carolina. So here in the middle of the state, there's this big kind of purple-blue area called the Piedmont filter region. And then down here, this kind of brown region is the Sandhills filter region. I am the reviewer, the primary reviewer for these two regions. So any eBird checklist that you submit in this geographic area will be subject to my review. So focusing on the Piedmont filter, so the filter applies to every checklist in that region. So if you start a bird checklist in Charlotte, and then you take a trip up to the Triangle on the same day and start an eBird checklist there, all of those, any checklist in this region on a given day will have the exact same list of species in it because the list comes from the filter. So let's look at the actual filter. This is the mysterious North Carolina Piedmont filter. And it's just a list of species, every species that might possibly be seen in the Piedmont, no matter how rare it is. And then next to each species, there's a timeline from January 1st to December 31st with some numbers. And let's look at, let's look at American widgeon. So for American widgeon, the first number is 500 from January 1st to March 21st. And then from March 22nd to the end of April, it's 50. And after May 1st, it's 0 through the summer. Those numbers are cutoffs. And this means if you report American widgeon in January, you can report 50 widgeon, you can report 100 widgeon, you can report 500 widgeon, and eBird will not blink. You can report that many widgeon without being questioned about it at all. If you go over that cutoff and report 501 American widgeons, then eBird will demand that you provide some details about that number. Not that you, not asking you to provide evidence that you did in fact identify American widgeon, but just to say something about how you counted them. Maybe you saw a big flock of 501 widgeon all at once and you counted them one by one. Maybe you estimated them by tens, or maybe you estimated them by hundreds. Maybe you saw 5 flocks that were each about 100. Just say something about how you came up with that number. Sometimes the number is smaller, like just a couple days ago, I was at Brumley South with Karen, and we were counting Kentucky warblers, and we were especially interested in the Kentucky warblers, so we paid close attention, and we ended up counting 8 singing males. We thought we might have had 9, but we definitely had 8. And the filter for Kentucky warbler was 6, so we had to explain how we came up with 8. So the difference between 6 and 8, well, we were in fact counting them carefully. So that was what we said, counted carefully. Now contrast that with just coming home and filling out your checklist after you get back home and say, man, how many Kentucky warblers did we see today? Must have been about 8 or so. And see, that's a little different from saying counted carefully. So we hope that you do count carefully and say something like that in your eBird checklist. And I see in March 22nd, we get more restrictive. And after that point, if you report more than 50 widgeon, we'll ask you about it. And after May 1st, the number drops to 0. So there's an important difference between species that have a number above 0 and species that have a number of 0. Species that have a filter cutoff of 0 are what eBird considers rare species. And if you report a rare species, then we want you to provide some details on how you identified it. Tell us some field marks that you used to come to your identification of American widgeon. So the filter divides species up into 3 main categories. There are the what we might call the frequent or the expected species that have a non-zero number on the filter for the date when you're birding. And those species will be on your checklist. So if we look at, say, compare American widgeon to mallards in May, American widgeons in May have a filter number of 0, so they will not be on a May checklist. Mallards have a number of 500, so they will be on a May checklist. And if we come over here and look at an actual checklist, sure enough, that checklist does not have American widgeon on it, but it does have mallard on it. And then the third group of species that are all the ones that are so rare that they aren't even on the filter. For example, until recently, neotropic cormorant was one of those, not on the filter at all. And then somebody saw one, so I had to add it to the filter, and it's now on there with a cutoff of 0. So let's compare what happens when you enter species like that. We got this checklist going, and we want to report 501 mallards. It doesn't immediately give us any warning that that might be a big number. So now let's say we want to add American widgeon. And we can't add American widgeon because it's not on the checklist. That's what to do. How can we saw an American widgeon, how are we going to report it? Well, we have 2 choices here. The one choice, there's this checkbox down here that says show rarities. And as you have now learned, by rarities, we mean species with a 0 entry in the filter. And those are the very species that are not on the checklist. So we could click this checkbox to show them. And now that I've done something that gives me the warning about mallard, I'll come back to that. But when I click show rarities, it's added in every single species on the filter, including American widgeon. There it is right there. So I've achieved my goal of being able to report American widgeon. The downside of show rarities is that it shows all the rarities, and you end up with a really cluttered checklist with a whole lot of species that they're just kind of in the way. So that's not really the most desirable option. So let's look at the other option. It comes up and says there's no matches on the checklist, but there's also that button, add species. So we can add that species to the checklist, and that gives us a blank to fill in. Now, this is a very powerful blank. In this form, you can add any species in the world. So, like they say, with great power comes great responsibility. You want to be careful about what you type here. Just yesterday, I had somebody wanted to report a black-billed cuckoo. So he went over here and started typing black-billed, and you see it gives you a list of possible matches for what you type. So by the time you type black-billed, it's showing you all the many species that have black-billed in their name. And then as you keep typing, it narrows it down further and further. So he got all the way out here to black-billed cuckoo, and he was done, and he hit enter, but he didn't notice that the top choice on that matching list was not black-billed cuckoo, it was black-billed cuckoo dove. So he reported a black-billed cuckoo dove in North Carolina, even though that's a species that's only found in Papua New Guinea. So I got to let him know about his mistake. But anyway, back to American widgeon. So you do the add species. I come over here and type American widgeon. And okay, so now I have one representative of each of those three groups that I mentioned. I have mallard, which has a non-zero number on the filter. I have American widgeon, which has a 0 entry in the filter. And I have black-billed cuckoo dove, which is not even on the filter. For the two rare ones, there's a note that says this bird is rare for this date and location. It's just the same thing for black-billed cuckoo dove. For mallard, it says this is a high count for this date and location. So when it's telling you this bird is rare, it wants you to go to this details box and type in some descriptive text that lets me know that you actually observed some field marks. You might say, you know, white crown, green mark on face, something like that. And for mallard, you might say counted by tens or whatever. And when you do this in the browser, then you also have to double confirm by checking the complete box over here. And then eBird will let you submit. Now then, I want to compare how that works on the app. So give me just a second to get set up here. Okay, here's the app on my phone. I'm using the Android app, but the iPhone is pretty similar. And let me see if I can. In this program that I'm using to display my phone, it kind of takes away my mouse pointer. So I can't show you with the mouse pointer what I'm tapping on. But I'm going to tap up at the top where it says number, species name, code, and enter these species. So I can enter my 501 mallards. And when I do that, it has that exclamation point in an orange triangle over on the right. That exclamation mark is your notification that this is a high count. So we're going to want you to provide the kind of information that I mentioned about how did you come up with that number 501. Likewise, if you want to report an American widgeon, now with the browser, we had to do something special to make American widgeon come up. In the app, if you look in the checklist, it's the same thing. American widgeon is not on the checklist. You cannot scroll to American widgeon, but if you search for it, it will come up. So you enter American widgeon, and it comes up, and it has that R in an orange rectangle over on the right. So that tells you that this is a rare bird, which you now know means it's a bird that has a 0 entry in the filter. So those are the two flags that you need to watch for when you're entering things in eBird. If you see that R, that means a rare bird. We want you to provide some details on how you identified the species. If you see that exclamation point, it means it's a high count, and we want you to give some narrative on how you counted. Likewise, you can report any, like when I was typing in American widgeon, let me do that black-billed cuckoo one again. Okay, so like on the browser, when you start typing up there, it gives you potential matches. So for black bee, there's a whole bunch of possible species that match that name. But there's always another choice that I think people often just are kind of blind to. Down at the bottom, it says tap to search entire database. On iPhone, the wording is a little different. On iPhone, I think it says click here to search entire taxonomy, but it's the same thing. If the bird that you want is not on this list, then you can hit that tap to search entire database, and now it will, previously it was only showing you matches from the filter, but now it will show you matches from all the species in the world. And sure enough, there's our black-billed cuckoo dove. So we could report that. If you report something that isn't even on the filter, you get this big rare bird alert box that you have to dismiss, and possibly seeing that will make you realize that you typed in the wrong thing, and you can go back to entering what you really meant to enter. Okay, so this is a good place to mention how to correct certain kinds of errors. Let's say you suddenly realized that wasn't an American widgeon that you saw. It was just another mallard. So you want to get the American widgeon off the checklist. A surprising number of people cannot figure out how to do that. I think I've actually had people leave it on there and add a comment, did not see, because they entered that bird that they didn't see and they couldn't figure out how to get it off. Well, getting it off is really easy. There are two ways that you can do it. One way is to just go in here and blank out the number. I kind of vaguely remember that maybe way back there was a time when that didn't work, and that might be one thing that gave people difficulties, but it does work now. So that's one way, is just to blank out the number and save it, and it'll be gone. The other way, if you're on an iPhone, is you can just swipe left to get rid of it. On Android, you can also swipe left, except it's kind of buggy and I can't always get the swipe to work. Let me try it now and see if it does work. Yes, it did work. So you swipe left and you see the little trash can, you hit the trash can, and it removes the number. So American widgeon is off the list. So that's how you correct that error. Now, I want to go back to what the reviewer sees. I'm done with that checklist, so I'm just going to discard it. So I talked about the reviewers working with the filter. The other thing the reviewers work with is what we call our queue. So whenever anybody reports a species that is rare, in other words, a species that has a 0 entry in the filter or a high count, a count that exceeds the entry in the filter, eBird presents that observation to me here in what we call our queue. I don't know why we call it the queue, because it isn't really a queue, but that's what everybody calls it. I usually I try to keep on top of these. I usually try to keep my queue pretty empty, but I've let it build up a little bit today so that I'd be sure to have some examples. And I have to say that between the height of spring migration and people having time on their hands with COVID-19, it's really increased my workload this last few weeks. I've had lots and lots of records to review. So anyway, I go through these records one at a time. And here's the ones, Mark Robato saw black-bellied plover today, and he wrote breeding plumage, black axillaries. Now that's pretty terse, but he did specifically mention a key field mark, black axillaries. So A, I know that he knew to look for black axillaries, and B, apparently he saw them. So that's good enough for me. And then icing on the cake, he also has a photograph of it. So I'm going to accept this record. I have 3 buttons here on how to deal with the record. In this case, I'm just going to click accept and give a reason, photo, video, auto. Bam, I'm done with that record. Now, the other 2 choices are for records that I'm maybe not quite so sure about. But you notice there's no button that says reject. No observation in eBird is ever rejected. That guy that reported the black-billed cuckoo dove from Papua New Guinea, that record was not rejected. It went on his life list. He has since corrected it, but for about a day it was on his life list. It wasn't rejected, but it was unconfirmed. Unconfirmed means that the reviewer did not think that that was a confirmable observation, but it stays in the database. Unconfirmed records, so unconfirmed records are in the database, they're on your life list. If you reported a bird that was unconfirmed and you go and look at your life list, that bird will be there. But nobody else will be able to find that bird. If somebody was doing research on black-billed cuckoo doves, they would not have found the North Carolina record because I had marked it unconfirmed. So anyway, unconfirmed and defer are pretty similar. Defer means I'm going to leave the record as a possibly valid record for now, but I want to get some more information on it from the observer. Unconfirmed means I'm just going to go ahead and mark it unconfirmed, and I may give the observer a chance to come back to me with some information that would make me change my mind, but for the time being and possibly forever, I'm going to consider it unconfirmed. Okay, so back to this record that I'm looking at. This record was flagged because, look here, it says filter limit 2, and he reported 3. So this was not flagged because there's a question about whether it was a Baltimore Oriole, but it was flagged for explain the 3. And he said, he confirmed, yes, he did see 3 singing males widely dispersed. So this makes it pretty clear that he really did see 3 males. So again, I accept it. And in this case, the reason is field notes, and I'm done with that record. Here's a blue-winged warbler that several people saw at Bynum today. All they had to write, bright yellow, dark wings, black line through eye. That's pretty much a blue-winged warbler. Good enough for me, so I accept that record. That's all you have to say. Now then, we get to this one. That I have a problem with this one. Little blue heron, And the documentation is on the edge of the Ferryton Village Pond. Well, she didn't say anything about how she identified it as a little blue heron. Doesn't even say whether it was an immature or an adult, which are, of course, completely different. So, but you could see a little blue heron. So I'm going to defer this one. And when I hit defer, so far the documentation is inadequate. I might change my mind about that later, but for right now, documentation is inadequate. And I'm going to send that person an email. Now, some of you have gotten emails like this from me, and I'm confirming that yes, indeed, they are form letters, pre-written. If you've given me something to work with, I might customize this form letter a little bit before I send it. When you basically haven't given me anything at all, I'll just fire it off the way it is. Starts out a little formal. It always says dear and your name. If I know you, I might take the trouble to change that to just your first name. So if you ever see an email with your first name, you know I went to just a little bit of extra trouble just for you. And if you don't see that, don't take it personally. So anyway, I'm just going to send this off to her and I'll wait and see what I hear back from her. Well, one more example here. Jeff Bean saw a ringneck duck. And again, a really good description. Dark heads, white on the beak, dark back, gray sides, white stripe at the side. Yeah, that's a ringneck duck. So I'm going to set that record. So basically, that's what I do as a reviewer. Now, you can participate in the review process yourself. I deal mostly with rare birds. eBird asks me to look at observations of rare birds and high counts. I don't spend much time looking at records of common birds. That would be just overwhelming to try to review every report of common birds. But you can help with that. You can go to any eBird page and click on Explore, and then come down here and search photos and sounds. And it will show you photos people have uploaded on their eBird checklists. And the default is to show you photos from all over the world and the most recently uploaded. Now, I mentioned that eBird has really been slammed lately with more people out birding, height of migration and all that. So they really backlogged. You'll see a lot of these still processing photo because they're just so backlogged with photo uploads. Anyway, you can change this. For example, you can pick a location. We can put in Orange County just to see photos that have been submitted from Orange County, North Carolina. And okay, let's, so Jean just uploaded some ruby-throated hummingbird photos today. Hasn't quite uploaded those yet, so let's go down the next line. Here's a tufted titmouse that Vern uploaded today, maybe just a few minutes ago, for all I know. And you can browse through photos by hitting that arrow over on the right to your heart's content. And sometimes, so besides looking at the picture, there's things for you to read down at the bottom, things for you to click on. I don't know if you ever noticed these things. You can rate the quality. Please do that. You can rate photos on a 5-star rating, 1 to 5 stars. Please note, some people are confused about this. 1 star is the worst quality. 5 stars, the best quality, not the other way around. But there's this other link down here that I want to talk about that says report. If you have submitted at least 25 complete checklists in the last year, which is a pretty low bar, you are authorized to click that report button. So if you say that's not a Swainson's thrush, you can hit report and it gives you a form where you can say that bird is misidentified. And then you would type in what the correct identification is, and maybe you elaborate on why you think that's the correct identification. And then you submit that, and those reports come to me, and I take a look at them. And I very much appreciate it when people do that. So I hope that more people will do that, because that is really almost the only way that I ever notice misidentifications of common birds. And once in a while, I'll be looking through data, and I may come across something that I think I need to look into, and you might hear from me about it. But by and large, I don't spend a lot of time on common birds. So I really appreciate it when users send this kind of report to me. And of course, that isn't misidentified, so I'm not really going to submit it. Okay, now I want to go back to the app and talk about something else. I talked about how the filter divides species up into three groups. The more expected birds that have a non-zero entry, the rare birds that have a zero entry, and the super rare birds that aren't on the filter at all. And the app species are divided up into a different set of three groups that has absolutely nothing to do with the filter. And it's these dots that you see next to birds' names. Some birds don't have a dot next to their name. Some birds have a semi-filled dot and some have a solid dot. Now then, nobody knows what these dots mean. Why doesn't anybody know what they mean? It's because nobody will take the trouble to find out what they mean. If you go to any eBird page, there are help files, and they're kind of okay help files. You should read some of them. And if you read all of them, you will eventually get all the way over here to this thing that says eBird Mobile Tips and Tricks. And you go in there, and you see there's an entry that says, understand the colored circles next to species names. There is an explanation that you can read, but I'm just going to give you my own explanation. So I talked about how the filters correspond to geopolitical regions on a fairly large scale, especially here in North Carolina, the pretty big geographic regions. Now, and I talked about how every checklist in the filter region has the same list of species. Now, separately from that geopolitical classification, eBird has divided the entire Earth up into a grid of 20 by 20 kilometer squares. So wherever you're eBirding, you are in one particular 20 by 20 kilometer square. And chances are other people have submitted eBird checklists in that square, and eBird has that data. So when you start a checklist there, eBird looks at that data. And so it's on a much finer geographic scale than the filter region. And it's also time-based, but in a different way than the filter. It's time-based by week of year. So eBird looks at data for that 20 by 20 square for last week, this week, and next week. Now, you ask, how does it know what's going to be seen next week? It looks at historical data. It looks at the last 10 years worth of data for the previous week of the calendar, the last 10 years worth of data for the current week of the calendar, and the last 10 years worth of data for the next week of the calendar. So, and all the complete, not incomplete, but complete checklists that have been submitted in that very square that you're in the 3-week period that you're in, if a species has been on more than 6% of all those checklists, it'll be on the checklist without a dot. If it's on some of the checklists, but less than 6%, it'll have that half-filled dot like the mallard. And if it hasn't ever been on a checklist, it will have the solid dot like widgeon or gadwall or blue-winged teal. Now, I want to emphasize then that, I don't want to use mallet. I was going to say that the filters were set up a long time ago by my predecessors before I became a reviewer, and I know there was a tremendous amount of work to create those filters, and I'm glad I didn't have to be involved in it. But they had to make a lot of decisions, and some of them are not always maybe the best decisions. And in preparing this talk, I've realized that probably made a mistake with gadwall. Gadwall should be a rare bird at this time of year. So let me pick a more realistic example, like pectorals. Let's look at pectoral sandpiper. Pectoral sandpiper is unreported in the particular 20 by 20 square where I am right now. It does not mean that it's rare. I want to emphasize the solid dot does not mean rare. The solid dot means that nobody has ever eBirded a pectoral sandpiper at this time of year in my square. And the simple reason for that is probably that there just aren't any ponds around here where there would be pectoral sandpipers. So it literally just means it hasn't been reported, not that it's rare, certainly not rare at the geographic level of the filter. So it does not mean that that's a bird that you have to provide details for. You're welcome to provide details, but you're not required to provide details just because there's a solid dot. The ones where you have to provide details are the ones where you see the orange flag over at the right. Okay, on to another topic. I want to talk about some things about finishing up a checklist and submitting it. So I'm going to put this checklist away. I hope everybody knows this, but in case you don't, sometimes you want to put a checklist away and without submitting it, and there will be a word up here in the corner that says hide, or sometimes it says close. You can just hit that and it'll put that checklist away without submitting it, and you can start another checklist or look at a different checklist. So we go to the checklists button at the bottom of the screen, and it shows my not submitted. This is another place where you can swipe left. It says recording, indicating that this is still my active checklist. I'm not going to submit that checklist, so I want to get rid of it. So this is another place where you can swipe left and hit the trash can, and that checklist is gone. Now, when you finish up a checklist and you're ready to submit it, you want to check that your minutes and your miles are correct. And here I have a checklist from Old Bynum Bridge, and I see it says I went 8.19 miles. That doesn't sound right for Bynum Bridge. You'd be unlikely to go 8 miles here. So I can review my GPS track by tapping on this map icon next to the miles. And I see that what happened was I started driving home and left my GPS track running. And by the way, I was going to say, ideally, if you're using the app to record observations in the field, you just go ahead and submit it on the spot when you leave. But I know that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you want to come home and maybe review the checklist for errors or whatever before you submit it. And sometimes you forget to turn off the GPS track. So here I am halfway home, my GPS track's still running. I just want to be sure everybody understands that you can fix this. Down here in the lower right, there's a pencil icon, the universal icon for editing. So you can tap that pencil and edit that track. Down at the bottom, there's a slider. So you grab the end of that slider and you can walk your track back. Until you get down to where you were when you should have turned it off. And then you hit done. And now we're back to a much more plausible 2.13 miles. So I have this other checklist here, and this is also set up to demonstrate that same thing. I'm going to deal with that just really quickly. Okay, this is a checklist from Howerton Road. Now, when you're ready to submit, you need to choose a location. So I'm going to tap up at the top for the location, and this select location has 3 panels up at the top. It says recent, nearby, or map. And I very often see people make bad choices here. So I want to go over what the good choices are. If 2 things are true, if 1, you're in a brand new location where you have never eBirded before, and 2, that new location is not a hotspot, then you need to go over to the map. And the map will show you with that gold, I guess I'd call that gold colored drop pin. That drop pin shows where you were when you started your checklist. Doesn't necessarily show where you are now, and it doesn't necessarily reflect where you went, but it shows where you started. And then down at the bottom of the screen, it will give a suggested name for that location. It says 7344 Howerton Road, Gibsonville, North Carolina, US, latitude and longitude. Now, if you want to use that location, you can tap where it says use this location. You might want to rename it to a name that's more meaningful. You get 1 chance to do that. Down here at the bottom, you can edit this text and say something like Guilford Farm or whatever you want. Once you go past this point, you cannot change that name in the app. I really complained about that during the beta, and of course they never listened to me, so that you don't get another chance to name it. You can submit it and then rename it on the website, but you can't rename it on the app. But anyway, having gone to the map here, I realized that actually I'm near a hotspot. And in fact, where I went birding was really close to the hotspot. So really, I don't even want to create a personal location here. I want to use the hotspot. So I'm going to forget all about typing in a name down here. I'm going to forget all about my gold drop pin. I'm going to tap on the hotspot drop pin. And now it switches me to the Howerton Road hotspot, and that will be the location that I use for this checklist. Now then, if I had known ahead of time that I was in a hotspot, I could have skipped that entire operation and just stayed here on the nearby list, and I would have noticed that the Howerton Road hotspot was at the top with a distance of 0 miles away. That's a tip. That's where I am when it says it's 0 miles away. So it would make sense to choose that as my birding location. Now you'd hardly ever use the recent tab. The one place where this might be useful is if you're kind of mixing old fashioned with newfangled and you do a pencil and paper checklist in the field, and then you come home and use the app to enter the data from your pencil and paper. Let's say I did a pencil and paper checklist at Sandy Creek Park, and I come home to enter it. Sandy Creek Park is a place I've been to recently, so it's on my recent list, and I could select that from my list, and that would become my location for this checklist. Okay. on to another topic. I want to emphasize this is something that seems to be a frequent source of confusion. The main purpose of the app is to be a vehicle for getting data from your phone to the website. The real repository of your data is the website. Once you've got the data on your website, we don't really care about what's on your phone anymore. It's just on the phone as a way to get it to the website. So for one thing, you can delete the checklist from your phone after you've submitted it. That has no effect on anything. Your data, once it gets to the website, it's there permanently. Doesn't make any difference whether you delete it from your phone. And sometimes I just delete all my checklists from my phone because I don't really care about having them there. And you'll never see complete synchronization of your data between your phone and the website. If you enter a checklist on the website, not on your phone, you're never going to get that checklist on your phone. If somebody else makes a checklist and shares it with you, you're never going to get that checklist on your phone. The phone is just a one-way vehicle for getting data from the phone to the website. Now, I'm going to digress just a little bit and slightly contradict myself and give you a heads up. If you're on Android, watch for a, I was going to say that eBird is kind of moving in the direction of putting other sorts of functionality into the app. And if you're on Android, watch for a big new feature that could be coming almost any day now, at least in the coming weeks. I'm not sure about iPhone. The last few years, the pattern has been that new features come to Android first and later to iPhone. I don't know the schedule. Anyway, on Android, you're going to see this new icon down at the bottom called Explore. And when you type on Explore, it will show you all of the hotspots within a radius of your current location. I have my radius set at 10 miles. So this is showing me all the hotspots within a 10-mile radius of where I am right now. And if somebody has submitted an eBird checklist from one of these hotspots in the last 7 days, it shows as red. If it's been more than 7 days since anybody eBirded there, it shows as blue. And it's just kind of interesting to me that for my circle, almost all the hotspots are over on the right where lots of people live and not very many over on the left where not so many people live. And you can tap on the individual hotspots to see what's been seen there, or you can look down here where it says nearby hotspots. So 25 of them have been visited in the last 7 days. So I can tap on that 25 and it will show me the nearby hotspots that have been visited in the last 7 days in order from distance to me. So the closest hotspot where somebody is eBirded to where I am right now is Meadowview Road. It's been 1 day since somebody eBirded there. You can go on down, let's look at one that gets more visitation, Brumley North. Let's look at Brumley North. It's been 1 day since somebody eBirded Brumley North. I can tap on that. And it will show me in a minute the list of birds from Brumley North. And if they've been seen in the last 7 days, it will tell me. So Canada goose was seen 2 days ago by Laura Lips Buffum. Wood duck was seen 2 days ago by David Pennebaker. Blue-winged teal has not been reported in the last 7 days. And it also has bar charts for the entire year. And so there's all sorts of things like that you can play around with in this new feature that will be coming soon. Now then, oh yeah, so I was going to talk about starting a new checklist. And so here, a brand new checklist. The default location is just called auto-selected with latitude and longitude. And let's say I saw a tufted titmouse. So there's my list with tufted titmouse, and well, I'm done. That's the only thing I saw. So stop the list and do some finishing up things. So let's say that I had somebody with me, an extra observer. So I tap on the one next to observers. And when there's more than one observer, you get this thing that says sharing. So I think everybody probably knows that if you're birding in a group, it isn't necessary and it even isn't desirable for each person to keep their own individual checklist. Instead, you should designate one person to keep the checklist and then share it with everybody. So you can share either directly from the app or from the website. And so to share from the app, you tap then where it says sharing. And you can see I'm a little bit of a Luddite about doing a lot of tapping on my phone. I don't do sharing from my phone. I prefer to come home and do it from the browser. But anyway, you can do it from the app. And I have this test ID that I've set up to use for this called KTest1. So you can share, you can specify people to share with either by their eBird username or by their email address. And what I have found is that nobody remembers what their eBird username is. I don't understand it, but nobody remembers. So everybody's going to be giving you an email address, but you can use username. So I'm going to use the username KTest1. It's already in my list as somebody I've shared with before. So I just tap on it and it pops it up there. And then I tap done. And now this list will be shared. And then finally, I have to choose a location. Now I want to go back to talking about choosing a location. The default on Android is that the top location is just that auto-selected latitude and longitude that it came up with initially. And usually you don't want to set your location just by latitude and longitude. You want to set it to a named location. On Android, if you tap that, it just flips you over to the map. And in this case, I see that I already have a there's the gold pin that shows where I am and the blue pin that shows a location that I've used before. So I would know that I want to select that blue location that I've used before. iPhone is a little different. I do not like the way iPhone does it. When you go to the map, down at the bottom, it shows you a suggested street address, which may or may not be the name that you want to use for this location. On iPhone, it just goes ahead and shows you that address at the top. So if you select that from this list, which a lot of people do, it just creates a new location at that address. Now, once in a while, that's what you want, but most of the time, you're probably eBirding at a place where you've eBirded before, and you want to choose the location name that you've used before, which for me is the second one on the list, Borland Road, 1714. So almost always you want to choose the second thing on the nearby list. Okay, so I submit this. Tells me it'll be shared and submitted. So now I'm going to go over to my website and look at that checklist. I have a little Zoom thing that I have to move out of the way first. There we go. There's my checklist with the tufted titmouse on it. Now, problem. I just remembered that besides the tufted titmouse, I also saw a Carolina chickadee. So what to do? I can go back to my app. I can tap the checklist icon down at the bottom here. And I can go to the submitted tab up here to look at my checklist that I've submitted. And I can open that checklist that I just submitted. And now, maybe you've never noticed this, but in the lower right-hand corner, there's an edit button. You can edit that list after you've submitted it. So I go in there and I add my Carolina chickadee. Oops. And now there's my list with Carolina chickadee and tufted titmouse. I review it and then I save it. So point here, you can submit your checklist again. You can submit your checklist more than once if you have to correct errors. Each time you submit it, it replaces whatever you had the previous time. So now I go back over here and refresh. And now I've got my 2 species on there. Now, I just thought of another problem. I shared this with my friend when it only had the tufted titmouse on it. So what is my friend going to see on his checklist? Is he going to see just the tufted titmouse, or is he going to have both species? Well, the answer is he has to accept the checklist, and he will get the checklist in whatever state it's in at the time that he's accepted it. So if he hasn't accepted it yet, he'll get both species. If he already accepted it, he might only have 1 species. And how do I know whether he's accepted it or not? It says here that there were 2 observers, but I know that he hasn't accepted it because it only shows my name. It doesn't show his name. When he accepts it, it'll show his name. So let me go over to his eBird account. And he of course, will get an email, but he doesn't even need to look at his email. He can just go to my eBird. And my eBird will say, you have a pending checklist waiting to be added. In other words, just somebody shared a checklist. So click here to view. And you have 2 choices. You can accept it or decline it. If you want this checklist, you accept it. If somebody sent you a checklist that you don't want, you can decline it. So I'm going to accept it. And then I'll look at it, and sure enough, it has both species on it because that change was made before I accepted it. So I go back here to my checklist and refresh. And now it has my imaginary friend's name. So it has both my name and my friend's name. That tells me that my friend has accepted the checklist. Okay, now there's another problem. I just remembered that besides those 2 species, I also saw a cardinal. So I want to add the cardinal to the list. I could go back and do it from the app, just like I did before, but now I'm going to show you how to do it from the web page. To add a cardinal here, I would click over here on Edit Species. And I get down to the cardinal, and I would enter my cardinal there. And then I go over here and click the big green Save button. And now I have the cardinal on the list. But now, this is another species that's only on my list, and it tells me that only I have the cardinal. So I go over and look at my friends list after you hit refresh. On his list, he doesn't have the cardinal, but it notes that I saw the cardinal. Now, possibly that accurately reflects what happens. Maybe my friend really didn't see the cardinal. If that were the case, we could just leave it this way because that reflects that I saw the cardinal and he didn't. But let's assume that actually he did see the cardinal, so we want to fix this. And there's 2 ways to fix this problem. One way is that he could just go over here and click the Add to My List link, and that would pop it right up to his list. Another way is that I could share this list again. So I mentioned before that you can submit a list more than once. You can also share a list more than once. I shared this before, but now I can share it again by clicking that Share button. And I'll type in his username. Now here is a bit of really terrible design on the part of eBird. It's not really clear what you click here. You might think that you go up here to click the Share button, but no, that button is the one that opened up this form down here. What you have to do is scroll down to find the button that you're going to click on. Now, if you're on a big screen, that button would be visible. But if you're on a laptop with a small screen, you have to know to scroll down. That's just a really stupid thing for them to have done. Anyway, so I click share. Didn't take. Try it again. There we go. And it still says the cardinal is only observed by me, and that's because now my friend has to accept it again. So he has to go back to my eBird, and he's got another notice about a pending checklist. So before, the two choices were accept or reject. But now the choices are replace or keep, because he already has this checklist. It's a question of whether he wants to update it or not. So if he just wants to keep the checklist the way it is, he can click keep, or if he wants to pick up the change that I made, he can click replace. And so now he has a cardinal on his list. And when I come back to my list and hit refresh, it also reflects that we all have the cardinal. So once a list is this, not that list. Once a list has been shared, the two copies are completely independent. You can make, each person can make any change they want. So for example, as you've been birding with a group, it's always the case that you didn't see all of the species. So this list might have been shared with you, but you didn't see the chickadee. You could go in here and click remove and take chickadee off of your copy of the list. And that would not affect, that would not take away chickadee from anybody else. But it's not limited to just the list of species. You can change anything. Like the person that shared this list with you might not have followed the advice that I gave, and maybe they should have used a hotspot, but they made up a new personal location. You want your list to be the hotspot. You can actually change the location. Maybe they got the time wrong. I didn't set the time when I started this checklist, but obviously I didn't see these birds at 8:30 p.m. I can go in here and correct the time on my on this copy of the list. Change anything and completely independent. Changing the time on your copy of the list won't change the time on anybody else's copy. Now there's one kind of exception to that, and that has to do with media, meaning photos and sound recordings. I took a picture of the cardinal, so I want to add that picture to my checklist. So I click add media over here. And I get my picture and I drag and drop it over there. And give it a couple seconds to upload. I have really slow internet at my house. And hit done. And so there's my picture on my checklist. And I go over to my friend's checklist and hit refresh there. And what do you know? He's got the picture. So this is the one thing that is coordinated between shared checklists. Everybody that has a species on the checklist will see any photos that anybody adds under that species. But now we have one last problem. We suddenly realize that that's not a cardinal, it's a rose-breasted grosbeak. So we have to fix that problem. And what are we going to do? Okay, going to go into edit species. Find the cardinal. And that's not what I wanted to do. Edit species, find the cardinal. Now, there are a couple of things we could do here. We want to get the cardinal off the list. Why is this alphabetical? I don't want it to be alphabetical. Okay. Okay, I want to get the cardinal off the list, and I want to add rose-breasted grosbeak to the list, and I want to keep the photo. Now, one way you could do this, you could get rid of the cardinal by just blanking out the number 1 next to the name, and you could add the rose-breasted grosbeak by adding 1 next to rose-breasted grosbeak's name. And that works, and in fact, that's the way you do it if you didn't have the picture. The picture is a complication because if you do it that way, you'll lose the picture. And I see this all the time. I ask people to correct their identification of a photo, and I explain how to make that correction and keep the photo, and then they go ahead and lose the photo anyway. And usually they don't bother to load it back. So if we just delete cardinal and add rose-breasted grosbeak, we'll end up on a checklist with the grosbeak and no photo. So how to keep the photo? I'm going to tell you how. There's this button over here that says change species, and that's what you want to click. And you tell it what you want to change it to, and click the change button. And there it is. It has done 2 different things in 1 step. It got rid of the cardinal and added the rose-breasted grosbeak, and it carried over the photo to the new species. And to complete this, we have to click the save button. Now then, to go over to my friends list, and I wonder what he's going to see. He doesn't see quite the same thing. It didn't take away the cardinal because eBird doesn't have any way of knowing whether my friend actually saw a cardinal. I told it that I didn't see a cardinal, but maybe my friend saw it. Also, I told it that I saw rose-breasted grosbeak, but eBird doesn't know if my friend saw rose-breasted grosbeak. So it leaves the checklist in this state that isn't quite what we want. So to fix this, we have to do a couple of manual operations. We have to get the cardinal off manually by hitting the remove. You have to confirm that. And I have to get the rose-breasted grosbeak on the list by clicking the add to my list button. And what do you know, when I do that, I get the picture, or he gets the picture. Well, eventually he'll get the picture. So this goes back to what I said before. If everybody on the list has the species, they share the pictures. When eBird didn't have me down as sharing the species, it didn't show the picture. Well, trust me, it will show the picture someday. And to your great relief, I am done. That's all that I had to talk about. So happy to open it up to questions.